Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you here today. I'm General Schneiderman, the Attorney General of New York State, and I thank you, Mike, for that kind introduction and for your commitment and leadership on these issues. I've been in this building for decades. I've spoken in this room many times, but I feel that we're here at a particularly important moment in terms of law and public policy relating to climate change, and I'm glad to be here with you and to be joined by so many friends from good organizations. Particularly pleased to be here with working with the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law at Columbia University. With the City Bar and the Sabin Center, we are really forming a hub of creative thinking here in New York about these critical issues. And Michael Gerard, who is the director of the center, will be our moderator, and we have a terrific group of panelists. I gave a speech not that long ago, but some time ago, about the issue of state and local governments being where the action is when it comes to climate change now. And today's panel really reflects the evolution and the pervasiveness of this sense that is how the movement is developing. So I'm very pleased to be here today with Ken Alex, Senior Advisor to the Governor of California and Director of the Office of Planning and Research, with Lori Burt, President of Lori Burt LLC, and formerly a colleague of my law school classmate Deval Patrick's at the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection, Dan Zarilli from our great Mayor's Office of Recovery and Resiliency, and Matthew Applebaum, the Mayor of Boulder, Colorado. I do also want to mention Len Sralovic and the whole group in my Environmental Protection Bureau, and Janet Sable, who's my first deputy, and the others in my office, who not only organized everybody in our office to march yesterday, but helped organize this and other events that are critically important as we turn a corner, I believe, right now on this essential and life and planet-threatening issue. So I think it's important for me to make clear that I really only got two things to say today, although sometimes that a politician saying two things can take a little while. But I want to talk about the use of state and local power to deal with the reality of greenhouse gas effects and also direct actions to slow the pace of climate change. But I want to really focus in on, because as much as people say they get this, sometimes they do not. States and cities have to step up to the plate because Congress is broken. So consistent with my views on public health, I'm not going to sugarcoat my remarks. This is a very, very bad situation in Washington. A lot of people are thinking, well, you know, we've seen things like this before. Actually, in my lifetime, I've never seen anything like this before, and I've been around for a while. So there are some states that are stepping up to the plate, and the leaders of others continue to either bury their heads in the sand or are actually actively fighting with us against efforts to solve the climate crisis. I'm grateful to our panelists for representing states that are on the right side of history as well as on our side in litigation frequently. But this is an important thing for people to really internalize. I appreciate your taking the time to do this, because lawyers and policymakers really are the ones who have to take the wisdom that we get from scientists and engineers and put it into action. So it's very important never to lose sight of the need for leadership in the legal community on these issues. And I was very inspired by my walk down Central Park West and 6th Avenue yesterday with several 100,000 of my closest friends. But I'm also excited by the fact that we're here today trying to move things forward in another way, in another arena, which is as critical as mass mobilization. We really need to be creative both in reforming the law and in using the laws we already have to address climate change. We're fortunate to have the group of people we have with us today, Michael Gerard and others, who are experts on shaping public policy. And I think while we need to change the law and while we need to come up with innovative ways to address the law, I'm going to speak also a little bit about our efforts to change public consciousness and change the conversation about climate change, which is very, very important. All of us who are lawyers need to do our legal work, but we also have to recognize that there really are two aspects to the work we're doing here. One having to do with doing whatever we can given the public's state of awareness now, and the other is the active effort to continue to change the conversation. So this is not a new fight, but ladies and gentlemen, I do think we have hit a defining moment this year, and I can see the energy and the momentum building towards actually doing something. The federal government's National Climate Assessment that was released in May, and the report of the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change issued in March really framed this moment. The UN report warned that without immediate concerted action, quote, "It is clear that in the future climate will be warmer, sea levels will rise, global rainfall patterns will change, and ecosystems will be affected." So as we engage in this battle, I think we have to all ratchet up our creativity to make it clear and easy for everyone to understand that climate change is affecting us now, to make it personal for people in communities all over America. We are not going to get anywhere until people understand it's happening to them, and that if they do not mobilize to demand action from both political and corporate leaders, it's going to get worse very quickly. So I have to say that for every person who was there at the amazing march yesterday, there are many more people who haven't really accepted that climate change is a real and immediate danger to them and their family. There are some people who don't even accept that climate change is real and that human activity is causing it, and we certainly need to keep challenging those people. I have always spoken in opposition to anyone focusing on one issue and becoming what we call a single issue voter, but I have to say, I can't really argue with Tom Steyer's effort to say climate deniers have no place in public life in America in 2014. And so I think a lot of what we focus on here in New York, because this is really more reflective of our population, I think this is true in some of the other states represented here, is dealing with the much larger group that kind of passively accepts that climate change is real, but are still in denial about what it means to them, and they're sort of passively resisting the imperative to action. That's really the group, I think, that we have to focus on mobilizing. To break through to those people, we need to bring home to them in a much more personal way the issue of climate change and the disruptions of our weather systems that we're seeing, because it comes in many, many different ways in different parts of the country and parts of the world. We're not going to see real action from politicians and business leaders until we create that broader shift in public consciousness. So as a step towards personalizing the issue and focusing public awareness, my office recently released a report on the frequency and intensity of intense rainfall in communities all across New York State. We have some copies here, and of course it's posted on our website, www.ag.ny.gov. And while we can't scientifically attribute any one severe weather event to climate change, there's a long list of them in this report, we know that the pattern and the impact of more frequent and more extreme rainfall in our state is undeniable. I know that there have been some serious efforts underway also in California, where there's a struggle about a drought in that case. And it's important to understand that I think some of our colleagues in California are struggling to connect up the dots between the drought and climate change, while some others were proposing the short-term solutions that avoid that discussion. In New York, we're not avoiding that discussion. And the federal government's own data make clear beyond any doubt that the country is experiencing more frequent and violent bad weather, and yet the gridlock in Congress prevents them from acting. On the international stage, many players insist that they will keep careening towards climate change unless someone else acts first. So ladies and gentlemen, while it's important to organize around what the UN is doing tomorrow and what it's going to be doing going forward in Lima and in Paris, the fact is that the leaders of every nation are going to act or refuse to act based on the internal political imperatives in their country. So our first and foremost responsibility is to create the political imperative in the United States for our leaders to take action. And unfortunately, this is really my first major point, and I can't emphasize it strongly enough. We're facing the most significant challenge we faced as environmentalists probably ever, the challenge of mobilizing the American people to action without a functional United States Congress. So this problem in Washington does not come as a surprise to the people in my office. We've been running into this since I took office in January 2011, but it is very important that you focus people on it, because the notion that there's some big solution that's going to be cooked up that's going to take care of these problems, and that state and local governments really don't have to engage on this, it's kind of beyond our purview, is just wrong. And we have to make sure that people are not laboring under that delusion. But when it comes to the failure to close, the federal government couldn't close the gun show loophole in order to secure background checks when 90% of the American people were for background checks, right? 90% of the American people don't like baseball. I mean, this is just remarkable, but you can't do that. They've yet to take action to deal with the scourge of prescription medication, overprescribing of drugs all over America, which is a very solvable problem, which we have addressed in New York. And the last example, and I really want to focus on this because this tells you how bad things are. There was a great program, and in each of the issues I'm citing here, in our state, my office has been able to fill in the gap. We did close the gun show loophole by working out model procedures with all the gun shows. We have dealt with the prescription drug crisis by having a real-time internet tracking system. You cannot doctor shop in the state of New York. You cannot get the same prescription from two doctors. We're the only state, though, that has that. And this last one is really kind of the sort of, if you have to play can you top this about bad things going on in Washington. There was this program that operated for more than 15 years, broad bipartisan support, tremendously successful and tremendously inexpensive. The federal government was reimbursing police departments half the cost of bulletproof vests for police officers to encourage them that all officers should have vests, and they shouldn't have to take up a collection among their family members to buy them. They can replace vests when they outlive their recommended lifespan. And some ideologues in Washington said, well, that's the federal government interfering with local law enforcement. So they cut that program. If you can imagine a member of Congress saying, I am opposed to bulletproof vests for police officers, and yet the funding for that program is gone. So in New York, we're using funds that we've gotten in my office from forfeiture from joint federal investigations, and we're using those forfeiture funds to reimburse police officers. But please do not let anyone walk around under the illusion that states and local governments should sit around waiting for Washington to do something. That's not the reality we're facing today, and I think that my fellow panelists, or the panelists who are going to speak after me, are going to be able to talk about some things that are happening in some of our allied states. The other real point I want to make, and you know, this is a major problem to have the federal government as broken as it is, but the good news is that we've also found that there's incredible work that can be done by state and local governments, especially when we build coalitions with other states. And this is really very important to emphasize that while things are bad in Washington, we've increasingly seen that we are a part of a coalition, and it's not like there's an official coalition. It's sort of developing on an ad hoc basis, but certainly Massachusetts and California have been there, and many of the issues that we've been litigating about and organizing about in recent years. And I'm happy that with thousands of activists in New York and across America, the states are mobilizing to action, and we've had tremendous success. Let me just remind you of a few successes as we recommit ourselves to greater activity and greater organization of allies among the states. In 2012, my office successfully defended the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or RGGI, a multi-state agreement that puts a price on carbon pollution in order to reduce emissions. It was under attack by a group called Americans for Prosperity, which is supported by the Koch brothers, who famously made their fortune in the oil industry, and they're now famous for some other things. We won't get into that this morning. New York is also leading a coalition of 7 states pressing the EPA to follow the mandates of the Clean Air Act to address methane emissions from the oil and gas industry. Very, very important issue that requires immediate action. As a direct result of our collective efforts, EPA is now developing a national strategy to reduce methane emissions, and collectively we are keeping the pressure on. I spoke with the EPA administrator on this very subject just last week, and we're hopeful that our coalition can help move them to a more aggressive posture. We led a coalition of 15 states and New York City in filing a brief with the U.S. Supreme Court, successfully arguing that both the EPA and the states have the authority to regulate climate change pollution from new or modified power plants. This is a tremendously important victory. This was establishing that under the Clean Air Act, we had pre-existing authority to issue these regulations. It's very important since, as I said, Congress is not going to make any more significant steps towards new legislative remedies, that we have to address the existing law, and it's critical that states and the EPA be able to move forward under the Clean Air Act. In June, the Supreme Court issued a decision largely agreeing with our coalition and our argument and substantially upheld EPA and state authority to limit emissions of climate change pollution by major stationary sources. Finally, earlier this month, I was proud that we helped to lead a coalition of 10 states, the District of Columbia and New York City, that's intervening in a lawsuit to defend a 2010 settlement with New York and several other states that requires the EPA to establish greenhouse gas emission standards for fossil fuel-fired electric generating facilities. The settlement, which was reached, which does provide for regulation, is being challenged by a coalition of 12 other state attorneys general, mostly from states that are major coal producers. So this is increasingly the pattern that I'm observing. I'm with a few other aggressive AGs leading groups of states, and similar groupings in many respects, although different states come in and out of different cases. But we're often now finding that we're fighting with groups of other states over these issues, over whether we'll have effective environmental regulation, whether or not we're going to address the issues associated with climate change. And in the absence of strong action from Congress, that's a pattern that will continue. And I would urge all of you to pay attention to who's stepping up to the plate and who's not, who's providing leadership and who's not. Because there's an old rule in politics in New York, an expression: we get from our elected officials what we make them give us. In terms of taking on an issue like climate change, which does require a commitment of some resources and is something that will not produce immediate results for any public official, you have to make sure that people understand that their constituents are paying attention to what they're doing. There's a very wide variety of, shall we say, both quality and commitment in offices of attorneys general around the country on this issue. Now, I want to focus on the two specific things we're trying to do with our report, and that in the office of the New York State Attorney General we're trying to do about climate change. I wrote an article a number of years ago about the two distinct aspects of political work: transactional political work and transformational political work. Transactional politics involves the day-to-day work of bringing lawsuits or making deals to pass legislation, and much of the work I've talked about so far this morning was transactional work. If you're going to bring a lawsuit, you have to take the case law as it is, and if you're trying to pass legislation, you have the votes that you can get given who's in the legislature at the time. But transactional politics can only get you so far. People have to lock in on a conceptual framework for a problem before they really are motivated to take action, and that's where transformational political work comes in. Transformational work has been neglected, I feel, by a lot of folks who fight for progressive causes over the last few decades, while our opponents have done a lot of very effective work to change the dialogue, to change the way people think about issues. They've been very effective at convincing people that collective action for the common good is sort of anti-American, and that the philosophy of our country at the outset was you're on your own, every man and woman for themselves. They are wrong, of course, but their transformational work, and you can see it in this area, the number of people who actually believe there's a legitimate dispute about climate change, has been very, very effective. They have eroded the collaborative vision of the founders, and we need to respond to that, not just pushing for the next case and the next statute we can pass, but by doing work to change the conversation. This requires us to open people's minds to better possibilities, and most fundamentally, to help root out assumptions about politics or economics or human nature that prevent us from embracing policies that will make our lives better. The fundamental notion that people are selfish and no one's going to really act on climate change. If I'm acting, I'm wasting my time because other people won't act. That's something that holds people back, and that really is an assumption that it has a lot to do with people's sense of themselves and not with a sense of science and not with a sense of law. So that's something we're trying to address. We want to change the conversation, and in New York, we have been working to do that, and we're well equipped to contribute. We are the nation's leading media center, And while we're trying to lead by example with our initiatives, we're also trying to lead by changing the way we communicate about this issue, and we're trying some creative approaches to that. I urge all of you, that is a very important part of our work going forward. This is, again, not just about challenging those who refuse to acknowledge that climate change is real. The transformational work in New York that we're really focusing on is shifting the way people think about our basic sense of the climate, the planet, and how we address collective challenges related to the environment. We can take action, and we must take action, and we have to have people see that that's personal to them, and there's a path forward. Because to most New Yorkers, climate change is an abstract, slow-moving problem that's really hard to relate to. It is tough. If you are an ordinary, stressed out, hurried, over-caffeinated New Yorker, to see how you can do anything about this problem, even if you acknowledge that it's a real problem. So it's up to us, again, to do the transformational work needed to enable everyone to clearly see that climate change is real, that all of us are feeling its effects right now, and that we can address it together, and that others will support us and join us in this effort. So here's a little bit of context for what we're doing right now in New York. When Hurricane Sandy hit, Superstorm Sandy is a technical matter, but it sure seemed like a hurricane to the millions of people who were affected. We were woefully unprepared. Our systems were not up to the challenge. Almost 2 million utility customers directly suffered power outages, hospitals were shut down, sewage treatment plants could not operate, so billions of gallons of sewage flowed into our waterways, and tens of thousands of New York families remained without power for weeks, in many cases months after the storm. In this New York City metropolitan area, we believe that more than $50 billion in economic activity was lost due to power outages and other infrastructure failures in the wake of the storm. Now, these are not problems caused by the storm, ladies and gentlemen. The storm came and its impact was felt and it was limited. These are problems caused by the weaknesses in our system for handling a storm of this magnitude. So then in January, our major utility, Consolidated Edison or Con Ed, applied to the Public Service Commission of New York State for $1 billion to repair and strengthen its energy systems after Sandy. But they came in with old data about what we could expect in terms of the extremes that we're facing in weather. Con Ed's plan did not consider the impact of climate change, including stronger and more frequent storms, surges in sea levels, and heat waves. They were looking backwards when they should have been looking forward. So they couldn't protect their customers and their communities in a future of more extreme weather if they're relying on data from weather patterns of 10 or 20 years ago. So my office intervened, and along with a few other allies, we changed the conversation and focused the attention of those before the PSC on the real and increasing threat that climate change poses to our state's infrastructure. Following our intervention, the PSC required the utility to make more aggressive actions, to take steps to harden its system against the threat of severe coastal storms and rising sea levels, and to engage in an in-depth study of its systemic vulnerability to climate change. To its credit, Con Ed is now on board with this new approach to utility planning that takes the reality of climate change into account. Now, that was a big step forward in preparing for the future, and we're working to make sure that all utility providers in New York are prepared to protect vital services from the severe weather that lies ahead, and they're using information based on what the projections are for the weather ahead. But this comes back to my second fundamental point. It's good for Con Ed to be doing a better job of strengthening its system. But the transformational aspect of this work is that we've required the utilities to affirm that climate change is real. The conversation has now shifted. They are accepting the fact and affirming the fact that this is affecting our communities today. It requires that they, as big established corporate entities, publicly address this fact and state that, in fact, climate change is real, the new weather patterns are real, and we have to deal with what is happening to us right now. So that's the transformational part of our work. It moves us past the stage of debating climate change to the stage of saying it's a reality, these are the concrete steps we have to take to deal with it, and every step we take to get either a major governmental or corporate entity to state, yes, this is real, we are basing our work on that, is a tremendously important part of our transformational, conscious and conversation-changing work. We have to do this, and on a positive note, I have to say there's some evidence that the work we've been doing this, and there are people in this room who've been spent a lot of hours, days, and years on this project of raising public awareness and changing awareness of climate change. There is some news that suggests that we are succeeding. An op-ed column in the New York Times not too long ago by author Robert J. Lifton, a New Yorker who refers to himself as a historically minded psychiatrist. I don't know him personally. That's how he describes himself. He wrote an article called The Climate Swerve. And in it he wrote that he believes Americans may be undergoing a psychological shift, the climate swerve as he puts it, that a sense that we are being threatened by our climate is seeping into the consciousness. That swerve, he wrote, could provide, and I quote, the psychological substrate for action on behalf of our vulnerable habitat and the human future. Now that is psychiatrist language for saying that transformational work that gets people to see an issue differently is underway. But whether you're a psychiatrist or a lawyer or an activist or a scientist, the point is the same. And really, if you want to step back and look at all great movements for social change in America, those movements all involve changing the way people think, changing the way people see things. I've made this argument many times in different contexts. The civil rights movement didn't succeed when Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act. It succeeded when consciousness had changed to the point that black people looked at white people and they looked at each other and said, we're basically the same. You can see a much faster trajectory in the last 3 decades over the change of awareness about the LGBT community and whether they were fundamentally different or just really a part of the human family. So I would urge you that in transformational politics relating to climate change, the work ahead of us is to shift the way people think about this issue and the way people think about how they are empowered to take action, and the fact that there are others who will rise with them. It's not something that you're going to try to do on your own and fail because no one else is going to step up. In our own modest way, our report on the increase in intensity and frequency of extreme rainfall is dedicated to doing that. The point of the report is that the extreme weather we're experiencing personally, here, now, and that our family and friends around the state of New York are experiencing is a direct result of global warming trends that we have been watching for decades and have to address. We owe it to the people of the Hudson Valley and eastern Adirondacks, where Hurricane Irene, this is all detailed in the report, dumped 11 inches of rain in 24 hours in 2011, and then they were deluged again a week later by the remnants of another tropical storm. We owe it to the people on Long Island who last month were swamped with 13 inches of rain in a matter of hours. That's almost as much rain as Long Island usually gets in an entire summer. They got it in 13 hours last month. And then there are other examples in the report. The people in the Catskills and the Capital Region in September 2012 got 7.5 inches of rain in a few hours, flooding out homes and streets and closing businesses. These are just a few examples, but we're putting them in the report because we think it helps personalize and bring home the reality of climate change. People who are flooded out of their homes or who had friends or family that experienced these storms in the last couple of years understand that something has gone wrong with the weather. They understand that there's something real, that something happened, and it's now, it's affecting them. It doesn't have to do with the melting of the Arctic ice sheet. It has to do with the weather being broken right here in New York, right now. It has to do with what's happening on Long Island. It has to do with what's happening in Western New York, in the Catskills, in Albany, and we're trying to bring that home to people in a very personal way. I understand that in California, as I mentioned, that there's a question about how do you frame up the drought that is catastrophic proportions, and I know some of our colleagues have been working to try and make sure that however it's addressed, it is attached to this issue so people can see that this is a real life, upfront, close and personal experience of the changing weather patterns that are the result of climate change. So it's up to us in every part of the country to take these real experiences and connect them to the facts of climate change, and then connect them to the actions we need to take collectively to address it. I think that it's important when you have extreme weather events, as we do in New York. My job and the job of all environmentalists to help send the message that this really is it. It's not something in the abstract. You are seeing it right in front of you. Your friends were just flooded out because of climate change. You are personally seeing it. And now it's time for you to join us to take the steps that we present that can affect this. I mean, New York City has just announced a major commitment changing the way they deal with energy. We have a struggle at the state level about what we should do. We are blessed with the fact that because of work of my office and some of my colleagues in government, we've recovered so much money from financial institutions related to that misconduct that we actually have a significant surplus in the state of New York. How we use that money, and that's going to be determined over the course of the next year or so, it has to be consistent with our efforts to deal with climate change. And I would urge all New Yorkers to focus on that issue in the months ahead. Now, connecting events that New Yorkers still remember well to science that explains them is a step in the right direction, but let me come back to my point about transformational work. If our report results in some concrete changes and New Yorkers take steps to prepare better for severe weather, that's good, but that's just really more transactional work. What we're trying to do with our report, and what we're trying to do as I travel to these communities around the state, is to bring home the understanding that climate change is happening now in a personal way to millions of New Yorkers, and to connect them up with the organizations in their communities or statewide that are doing the work to address climate change. So this is a part of an ongoing project. You make it real for people, and then you connect them up to the organizations that show them what they can personally do to participate in dealing with the problem they have just experienced. So we connect the changes in the weather with the reality of climate change, and then people join in the fight to take action to deal with this incredible threat. So working together, working more and more creatively together, we can and we will create a healthier and more environmentally sound world for ourselves and future generations. I look forward to working more closely and more self-consciously with the group of states that are emerging as the sort of the green states, the states that want to take more aggressive action on climate change, and that's something that I hope to address. We're about to have an election, so we'll see exactly who's in office in what state 6 weeks from now, but this is something that I intend to address at the multi-state level in the very near future. And please understand that whether it is building multi-state coalitions, fighting in court over important issues, pushing the EPA, sometimes when we feel that they need to be pushed, defending the EPA, sometimes when we feel that they need to be defended, my office, the Office of the New York State Attorney General, is always going to be your partner in these efforts. We have a very strong commitment. Lemon, the Environmental Protection Bureau, decided that we should all march yesterday, and they invited the whole office, and we all marched yesterday. So it was really a great event for all of us, and a great event for people who work in other areas of the office to be connected up to the great work our Environmental Protection Bureau is doing, and the great work that we are doing in coalitions of states around the country, week in, week out, month after month. So we will always be open to working with you. We'll always be open to new creative ways to open people's eyes and to change the conversation about climate change. We have to, if we're going to meet the challenges that lie ahead. I thank you for being here today. I thank you for your devotion to this critical cause. And I'm very pleased to be a part of addressing this problem with all of you. Thank you.